Hi there, I'm the Saxophone Oracle, and today I want to talk a bit about alternate fingerings. So most of us, when we first start learning saxophone, we get ourselves a book, and inside we have a fingering chart. We open it up to learn where we need to put our fingers to make the different notes. And soon after, we very quickly realize that for some notes, there are multiple fingerings. These are called alternate fingerings. And when we're starting out, people often have the question, well, why are there multiple fingerings? Do I need to learn all of them? What are the different ones used for? Etc. So hopefully today we'll clarify that a little bit. So at first, I want to talk about the 4 most common ones, okay? The ones that are most used. So that's where we'll start. Let's start with F sharp. So F sharp, we know if we have all 3 fingers down in our left hand, we put our middle finger down. That's the normal F sharp fingering. I'd say that's one I use 95% of the time. But if we put our index finger down instead, and this little side one that we play with our ring finger, we get the same note. So for me, that is simply a chromatic fingering. I only use it when I'm playing a chromatic scale or a passage where I need to go by semitone from G down to F sharp, G down to F or F up to G. So like a passing tone scale or something like that. Why? Because it's a lot cleaner than going like this. So you get a lot smoother technique, a lot smoother transition. That's it, chromatic fingering. That's the only time I ever use it. Next, we notice the note C has 2 fingerings. So the most common one, I'd say 99.9% of the time, you're using just your middle finger in your left hand. But there is an alternate. You put your index finger down instead, and you have these side keys, the middle one here. If you use that, you get a C as well. So I mean, I suppose you could use it in regular ways, but for me, it's simply a trill fingering. I hardly ever use it unless I want to go from B to C really quickly. That's it. I mean, I suppose if you're playing a 1-octave scale, you could use it. But as soon as you try to go up to the 2nd octave, it gets to be a really awkward switch from C to the D. So for me, simply a trill fingering. That's it, that's all. Next, B flat. So this one has 3 fingerings, generally. I'd say the most common one, the one you're going to use 90% of the time, is what we call the bis B flat fingering. So our index finger, we play the B key and this little other pearl beneath it. That's our B flat. And that's the number 1 fingering, I think. You're going to use 90% of the time. So anytime you're in a flat key, basically your index finger is going to live on those 2 pearls. Okay, but there is another one that's really common, and that's the side B flat. So our first 2 fingers in our left hand and the lowest side key in our right hand. So this one I say we use 10% of the time. I use it both as a trill fingering and as the chromatic fingering. So if I have to go between down or up chromatically between C and B, that's the way I go, because it's a lot cleaner than moving our finger off the bis key. All right, so those are the 2 main B flat fingerings. There is a third one that you'll notice on fingering charts, where you play the index finger in your left hand and the index finger in your right hand. This comes from the flute fingering system. Flute doesn't have a bis key, so that is a really common fingering on flute. On saxophone, we barely ever use it. You would use it for playing arpeggios, things like that, but the bis key really has taken away the need from it. But I think it's really cool to know it's there, because it has a unique tone, in my opinion. I think it has a much more beautiful tone. It has more overtone, much more resonance. So here's the bis fingering, and then I'll switch to the other one. And then here's the 1-and-1. Now going between the two. So I think the 1-and-1 fingering that we don't really use, I think it's got a really unique tone to it. And I use it a lot if I'm playing a ballad or I have to hold a really long B flat. I often choose that one. And I think the reason is you'll notice if you put down that finger, it closes a couple more holes, a couple more tone holes, and it directs the air through the entire horn, so it gives it a slightly different color. So while you may never use it, I think it's really worthwhile to be aware of it, because it may come in handy. Lastly, the fourth most common one is the alternate high F fingering. So most modern saxophones have this key up here that we reach with our finger. So I would say 90% of the time, I would use the regular F fingering, which is all three of these palm keys, and this side key, the top side key. But if we play the C or middle finger and this top key up here, we get an F as well. So when you're just starting out saxophone, I think the only time you would use that is if you're playing an arpeggio, like an F major, F minor arpeggio. I think that's when you would use it. Now, if you start getting into altissimo playing, that's going to be really helpful, using that fingering instead to transition up into the extended register of the saxophone. But hey, if you're already playing up there, then you're probably more than familiar with that fingering. Okay, so for most of you who are just starting out, or intermediate or ish players, that's probably all you're going to deal with. But there are some other alternate fingerings that I want to talk about, because as you advance, they're going to become useful. The only other one that you might see on a fingering chart is an alternate for high E. So the regular high E fingering is you have these two palm keys and this top one here on the side. You can also get a high E if we have all three of our left hand down, and instead of, we move our index finger up to that alternate F pearl. That one, again, you hardly ever use it. It does have a slightly different tone. I think it has a little more overtone to it, a little more body, so you might want it for the color. But the only other reason you'd use it is because it's good to transition into the altissimo. So it's good to be aware of it and practice it, because once you start developing the ability to get up high like that, you may want to use it. So C major arpeggio. Or A major. That's basically the only time I use that one myself. But again, it's good to know about. Now I want to talk about some fingerings that you probably won't find on a regular saxophone fingering chart, but they're very useful. And at this point too, I think it's worth mentioning that with the different harmonics of the horn, we can put all kinds of different fingers down and sometimes produce the same note as a regular fingering. So it's really worthwhile when you're doing long tones or part of your practice to just get curious, investigate what happens if you switch up fingers, because you might find another fingering you like for whatever reason, be it a tone color or some kind of passage where you might want to, where it might come in handy. Okay, so one obvious one is that we can use from the Overtone series. So for instance, an alternate C fingering that I often use is the overtone for the low C. So there I'm just playing the low C fingering without the octave key. And for that matter, sometimes I play the entire upper octave without the octave key, because that's an option too. While we're sticking with the C, this is sort of, as I mentioned, with the 1-in-1 fingering for B flat, where we're forcing more air through the column. This is something I think John Coltrane did. I know Jerry Begonzi does this, a lot of players. So if you're playing high C, you can throw down the whole bottom stack to force the air out of the horn. You're going to get a different tone color. Switching between the two. So that's something you can do. For that matter, something a lot of players do is they just keep that C finger down for the very same reason. And so anything you're playing in your left hand, I'm gonna keep that down for my entire left hand. It gives you a slightly different color. So that's something you can experiment with. How can you play the notes but force more air out of the horn to get a different color? It's interesting. Another super common one is if you're in the upper register, for example, playing an A, if you finger the note a fifth lower, you can get that same note. So I'll demonstrate. There's the A, now I'm going to finger a D. C, or G, sorry, with the C fingering. So something to be aware of. I mean, how often you're going to use it, I don't know. But, you know, you've heard probably Michael Brecker do something like this. It's based on that. So it's useful to know. So I would highly encourage you to check it out. The last one I want to leave you with today is a way that helps me get around the stuffy D in the middle of the saxophone. I see a lot of people online suggest just playing the E flat palm key. For me, I don't know, that doesn't really work. Here's the regular D. And this is with the E flat palm key. It kind of works, but it's kind of a weird sound and I have to do a lot of adjustment. Maybe on some saxophones, on modern saxophones, that works. But here's what I do. I play the regular D fingering, but then I open the high D, I vent that key. So almost any time I play a D, I use the regular fingering and I open that guy to vent it. I think it gets a less stuffy tone, a lot more resonance, and it plays pretty well in tune. So that's one I like. So I would encourage you to try different things, see what happens, see what kind of notes you can get. There's all kinds of stuff based on the overtones I haven't even talked about that are possibilities. I am the Saxophone Oracle, and that's what I wanted to share with you today about alternate fingerings. As always, I hope you find the information useful and helpful. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Remember to tell your friends. If you have any questions, please reach out to me by email or in the comments below. I'd love to answer them in future videos. So thanks again, and I wish you happy practicing. Bye for now.